Hi, did you ever fall down a Wikipedia rabbit hole? It's when you start with one interesting thing and you keep clicking on related links and then you end up somewhere completely different. No? Well, I do that sometimes and I find it really fun, and that's what this video is about. It covers a bunch of interesting things that I read along the way, and I started with a wet sock and finished with first cat in space. High above the Mojave Desert, the test pilot Scott Crossfield was descending in the experimental X-1, the aircraft that first shattered the sound barrier. But as he approached the runway, disaster struck without warning. Ice began creeping across his windshield like a frozen death sentence. Thick, impenetrable ice that transformed his cockpit into a tomb of white. Crossfield was flying blind at 200 miles per hour. Panic rising, he tore through the cramped cockpit, searching desperately for anything to scrape away the frozen barrier. A tool, a pen, anything. His hands found only smooth surfaces and delicate instruments. Nothing. Then, in a flash of desperate genius, he looked down. No heavy pilot boots today, just regular shoes and cotton socks. Crossfield ripped off his shoe and peeled away his sock. Pressing his bare foot against the sub-zero metal floor, he stretched forward, the cold biting into his flesh like razors. With methodical fury, he scraped at the windshield. Inch by agonizing inch, he carved out a porthole no bigger than a silver dollar. Through this impossibly tiny window, he caught fragmented glimpses of the desert floor rushing up to meet him. Threading the needle through the pinhole view, Crossfield lined up his approach. The X-1 slammed down hard, scraping its right wing against the desert in a shower of dust. But he was alive, and he had just proven that sometimes the difference between life and death is nothing more than a wet sock. Some people think it's weird that hundreds of millions would be invested in developing the technology, but nobody would think of having something to wipe the glass with. In fact, this also happened on the Apollo program, which sent men to the moon. Low-tech solutions had to be quickly figured out. That's because there are so many unknowns, each flight was risky, and nobody could really foresee all the possible circumstances. For example, when a later version of the plane, the X-15, went 5 times the speed of sound, it encountered an unexpected problem. The radio went out. That's because at such high speeds, the air hitting the plane turns into plasma. Since plasma contains free electrons, that interferes with radio communications, and that's how you get a blackout. So how does a pilot sound as plasma accumulates? Firstly, his voice starts sounding a bit weaker, then a bit muffled as if it's underwater, and then static. It starts surrounding his voice. Slowly, it would fade to complete silence, and there would be nothing reaching the station. When listening to radio signals, which are hard to figure out, you can use a radio spectrogram to help you actually see it. The x-axis is the time and the y-axis are various frequencies. But in the few years after World War II, when the first supersonic plane flew, these spectrograms were very limited, expensive physical machines. The radio was still a new technology and it was the only way to communicate worldwide. During the subsequent Cold War, there existed things called number stations. They would transmit encoded messages, a bunch of nonsensical numbers that only the spies abroad could understand. Being a radio operator was fun. You could actually discover all sorts of things just by listening. One weird signal nobody could explain came from a Russian station called UVB-76, which was first heard in the 70s and operates to this day. It would simply repeat a buzzing sound, which really makes no sense. Sometimes a voice will read out cryptic numbers, but since that happens only 2 times a year, it's not a numbers station. Despite decades of monitoring, nobody knows what it's really for. One theory is that it's a dead man's switch. If it stops buzzing, a nuclear attack has wiped it out, so Russia should launch a nuclear attack. Or maybe it is linked to spies sending stuff, but the buzzing sound is too simplistic to contain anything encoded. In 2012, for a short while, something astounding was heard. The song Gangnam Style. Turns out it was just pirates. Those are people who are just having fun with a really powerful transmitter and broadcasting on the same frequency. Maybe the whole station is simply about keeping soldiers on their toes. You know, weirdness abounds when progress is rapid, like during the Cold War. Weird creative solutions played out quite well in the past. I can imagine someone suggesting a mind-controlled cat that would walk into a room with a secret microphone and an antenna in its tail to listen in on conversations. You think that's funny? Well, I actually do, but that's exactly what the CIA tried to do. They figured that Asian military leaders let cats walk around casually so it could work. Maybe? They implanted microphones and batteries into cats and then trained them to follow directions via ultrasound. They let them loose and the cats just did whatever they felt like doing. Guys, you can't force a cat to follow orders. If you ever had a cat, you would know that. Why would anyone use cats for anything important other than cuddling? Well, I don't know, but that's what the French space program tried to do as well for some reason. Yes, the first cat in space was a stray cat from Paris, launched on a Veronique AG-1 rocket from Algeria in 1963. However, this one worked a bit better because the cat didn't need to do anything. The cat would just sit in a box, which all cats love doing, so that's pretty clever. They still wanted to make sure they got the best catstronaut for the job, so they actually picked many cats and tested them for their, box sitting abilities. And the result is they picked the calmest cat to go into space. Amazing! 157 kilometers up for a total flight time of 13 minutes and 5 minutes of being weightless. So that was the first cat astronaut, and I'm sure she had a lot of fun.